Just teasing you, Nicholas.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Internet is working, and we are very glad for that.
Yes, hopefully internet is working. So yeah, for those who are already in, we had a small issue a few days ago for a webinar with CBs where I lost my internet because apparently mobile provider I had a limited number of gigabytes and MS Teams is using a lot. So at one point there was a break for 15 minutes. Now I am kind of switched to wired internet and it should be working well.
It does so far, so it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should start, I guess.
Yes, I guess so too.
And
welcome everyone.
Yeah, we welcome everyone. And let me just arrange my screens a little bit. So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for taking your time from your obviously very busy schedules to join us for our second technical webinar on the changes in the revised standards. My name is Roman Polechenko. I am Assurance Manager at SBP, and I will be leading this webinar today. My colleagues Nicholas and Laszlo, they are also attending this webinar, and they will help me with Q&A session. Yesterday, we have already covered American time zone, or let's say we assumed it was primarily for American time zone, although some people from Europe also joined, maybe those who like to work in the late evening. And today we are basically repeating the same webinar, but for European and Asian time zone. Although I already noticed there are somehow some people from North America joining this one as well. We are looking forward to an insightful and interactive session with you, which will consist of presentation and Q&A like the last time. So before we start, again, I will give you some quick housekeeping items. You should be very familiar with them already. We have done this kind of webinars for quite a few times. Webinar is being recorded and it will be made available next week on our YouTube channel. We'll send you the link once it is published. You can see that your camera and microphone are disabled during the whole webinar. The webinar will consist of the presentation, so like one way speaking, me presenting you some slides, and then we will open a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions during the presentation. So if you're using Teams, you should go to the upper menu and there is a tab called Q&A. So if you press it, you should be able to submit your questions. Technically, you could also use chat, but if possible, if this Q&A function works for you, then please put your questions there. It just helps us to organize questions later for the Q&A document. As I said, at the end of the presentation, we will have time to answer as many submitted questions as possible. And we will also have a quick break between the presentation and Q&A, I think around 10 minutes, just to, if you need to grab another coffee or take a quick call or something like that. So to start with, let's check the objectives of today's session. And it is to provide additional explanations on the key changes in standards version 2. I will try to avoid repeating previous webinars and focus on new information. However, several slides are very critical and I will still show them again. So apologize to those who know new standards already by heart. We still find that some slides are a little bit potentially confusing. They are very new concepts and should be probably repeated a few times again. Secondly, I will update you regarding progress with some remaining normative documents, some new interpretations, as well as I will announce some events which are happening after the summer. After approximately 1 hour, or let's say 45 minutes to 1 hour, we will have a 10 minutes break, as I promised, and then we'll start answering your questions. So the outline of the presentation, here you can see what you can expect today. I will indicate new indicators in Standard 1. I will compare RED 2 sustainability requirements to SBP Standard 1 version 2. After that, I will remind everyone about applicability of the supply-based evaluation. This is this potential repetition which you will need to tolerate, but where I will show familiar slide and go through some of the concepts again. Then we will provide you an update on benchmarking report. Then we will give you some additional information on the mass balance. After that, since we have finalized ID5E document and updated the SAR report, I will mention this and mention few things what have changed. And finally, we will give you some other technical updates, inform you about some of our communications and events. So let's start with the first topic, which is Standard 1 new indicators. During the previous webinars and through the email and different interactions, we received a question to map specific indicators which are really new in the Standard 1. So this should help certificate holders to understand the extent of the updates they need to do to their existing supply-based evaluation procedures. So here I will have a simplified list of new indicators. I didn't include the complete wording, but rather shortened wording to keywords and topics. So of course, like when you start actually updating your SBE, you need to open the standard and you need to read the whole wording of indicators. But today I will just give you some keywords and key topics. So as you remember, new standards have 4 principles, so I will go one by one. The principle 1 is about legality. It has no new indicators, and existing indicators were streamlined and optimized. The principle 2 is about environment. Under principle 2, we have 2 new indicators. One is about conversion, or more correct to say banning of conversion of forest, wetlands, peatlands, and highly biodiverse grasslands. And then we have an indicator requirement about regeneration of logging sites, harvesting sites. Under principle 3, this is the principle about forest carbon. We have strengthened it the most. We have included LULUCF requirements from RED 2. Then we establish restrictions on source and feedstock from low productivity sites, as well as sites which share combined attributes of HCV, high conservation value, and HCS, which is high carbon stock. Another entirely new indicator is the cascading principle, and it talks about restricting the use of high quality stem wood for biomass if this feedstock is in high demand for the long-lived product industry. Moving on to principle 4. Principle 4 includes social requirements. There we have 6 new indicators. This includes minimum wages, legal working hours, workers' benefits, negative social and community impacts, FPIC, and designated cultural heritage sites. So in a rough summary, Standard 1 has in total 12 new indicators. And that should show us that other 30 indicators, so total there is 42 indicators in a new standard, other 30 indicators are either the same or improved versions of the version 1 of the Standard 1. This whole analysis is obviously not very precise scientific research here. So kind of in order to check it and compare it in details, you would of course need to go and check the new standard, read the indicators, compare it to the old ones. However, this can give you some impression about the scale of the changes and highlight what could be the indicators, some preliminary information, what additional work you may need to do to amend your supply-based evaluation to include new risk assessment for new indicators, and then plan some mitigation measures if necessary. Then the next topic is trying to compare SBP Standard 1 version 2 with the RED 2 requirements, with the Bridging ID. So during the previous webinars, as well as in many various offline interactions, we received common requests to outline the difference or connection between the Revised Standard 1 indicators and RED 2 Bridging ID, particularly section about sustainability requirements for forest biomass. So on this slide, we can see RED II sustainability requirements. You should be quite familiar with that already. I showed it in some previous webinars. We have Article 29, which speaks about sustainability requirements for forest biomass, and there are two paragraphs. Paragraph 6 is sustainable harvesting, and paragraph 7 is LULUCF. So the checkbox on the right side means that we have provided a Route A evidence for most of the sourcing areas for LULUCF. So those of you who are following what we are doing with RED II, you should be aware that we have published so-called official risk assessment, official Route A evidence for LULUCF, covering, I think, around 20 countries. We identified countries from where SBP feedstock biomass is coming from, and only one country was not meeting the requirements, but I will mention this in a moment. So what I did then is in the next slides, I will try to establish a connection between RED II requirements indicators and Standard 1 indicators. So on the left, we have RED II indicators. These two talk about legality and regeneration. And on the right, I have put a corresponding indicator from the Revised Standard 1. So you can see that sometimes these indicators are just one-to-one, and sometimes RED II indicator is covered by several indicators from SBP Standard 1. I must admit that the requirements are not exactly the same. For that reason, it is required to do the risk assessment separately to make sure that both requirements are properly covered. As a general observation, I can only say that SBP indicators are at least at the same level, and same evidence could be applicable to both criteria. Since our Standard 1 itself is not directly recognized by the European Commission, then we cannot formally say that these indicators are equivalent or are the same. That's why when you as a biomass producer do the risk assessment, you need to have a kind of separate risk assessments. Of course, it's up to you how you organize it in your procedures. It can be the same document, same Excel file, for example, where you kind of combine those things. But it needs to be very clear that you are assessing risks for both separately. However, of course, under the proper justification, you can use the same evidence and the same risk management measures for RED II and SBP requirements. The Bridging ID section 6.3. So again, those of you who will start adding RED II to their scope, you should go and get familiar with Bridging ID document. Section 6.3 talks about legality and sustainability requirements. And in this particular section 6.3, there is more details about what legality of harvesting operations and forest regeneration of harvested areas, what does it actually mean, and how Route B shall be implemented in this case. For example, it further clarifies the requirements for regeneration. So it's not just that the sites needs to be regenerated, it also speaks that the quality of regeneration needs to be at least at the same level, that from the environmental point of view, you should not degrade your forest sites, you should not turn primary forest into the plantation forest and things like this. The detailed explanation of SBP Standard 1 indicators may be found in a separate guidance document. So I told in the previous webinar that now we have not just standards, but we also have a number of guidance documents. And we do have a guidance document for Standard 1, where for each of the indicators, we provide quite detailed explanation. We provide some examples of implementation, of means of verification, of potential impacts, and so on. So if we move to the next RED II indicator, this one is about protected areas. Please pay attention that it only talks about legally protected areas here. So when it comes to European legislation, RED II, it doesn't speak about any kind of voluntary things, but it's more about what is required by the law. So like those protected areas which are legally protected through the national or international legislation, this needs to be maintained and preserved and basically covered. SBP requirement, on the other hand, is more demanding because it talks about high conservation values in general, regardless of the legal status. For that reason, we see that SBP indicators go beyond RED 2, and this is another example where one indicator of RED 2 is covered by several indicators of SBP Standard 1. So like Standard 1 indicators 211, 12, 13, this is more or less the same indicator split into the steps which we are taking when evaluating the risks. Next one is maintenance of soil quality and biodiversity. We have two indicators in SBP on this. We have a separate indicator on soil quality and several indicators about high conservation values and biodiversity. So we see that SBP perfectly covers this RED 2 indicator. And last RED 2 requirement for sustainable harvest is a long-term production capacity. And again, on the right, we have corresponding SBP indicator, which should sufficiently cover RED 2. You can read the indicator itself. The wording is not exactly the same, but the intention and the kind of the meaning, the objective of indicators is very similar. When it comes to RED 2 LULUCF requirements, then we managed to provide a route A for most of the sourcing countries, as I already mentioned. However, one country, Brazil, it doesn't meet a route A criteria. The solution is to apply route B in this case, and route B is pretty complex, and some guidance is provided in the bridging document section 6.4. So route A, if you remember, for LULUCF, it was about just confirming that the member state or just even the countries outside Europe, that they have signed the Paris Agreement, that they have committed to reducing their emissions, that they have submitted the national contribution kind of reports where they define their national contribution. So there are certain steps which are pretty straightforward and easy to check, and most of the countries which are currently the sourcing areas for SBP scheme, they are meeting this requirement, meeting this route A, and only one country, Brazil, which is not kind of fully meeting the requirement, will need to apply route B. However, on the right, we can see that there is a corresponding indicator from Standard 1, from SBP Standard 1 version 2. And this indicator talks about actually making an assessment that shows that the forest carbon stocks are stable or increasing. So if you look at SBP indicators, then they are not as simple as RED 2. They are saying, although you can demonstrate all things related to Paris Agreement, the risk still needs to be assessed on what is actually happening in the forest related to the forest carbon. So this requirement, I would argue that it is very similar to the route B in the RED 2 bridging ID. So FSC and PEFC certification, they do not sufficiently cover forest carbon topic. So that means that everyone who will be applying supplier-based evaluation will need to do some kind of risk assessment, some kind of analysis to evaluate the dynamics and the situation with the forest carbon stocks. The details about how to actually do that can be again found in the bridging document. There is section 6.4. There is also a special annex in the bridging ID. And when it comes to SBP Standard 1, then you can find some additional information in the guidance document. So that was about comparing RED 2 and SBP Standard 1 requirements. Hopefully, this is helpful for companies to optimize their efforts and to kind of optimize their procedures and processes. We are probably expecting to develop some kind of document, not just these slides in the webinar, but some kind of document making this comparison so that it's easier, like, more handy to use in your work. And of course, I mean, there may be a need, and feel free to submit some requests and ideas to us on what kind of webinar or what kind of additional explanations, training you need on RED 2 bridging ID document. So like what else we should explain because we are receiving obviously quite a lot of feedback that the RED to Bridging ID document is not very straightforward. Although, as I explained many times before, it has been dictated by the European Commission, and it's not SBP own invention to make such kind of substantial document, and it was mostly driven by the European Commission process. So next topic is supply-based evaluation. So although I promised to avoid repetition, in today's session, I would still like to show you this slide. I will try to make my speech a little bit shorter, but still, it is very important to understand when supply-based evaluation is applicable and to which extent. There are major changes compared to the version 1 of the standards. So we remember that we need to categorize feedstock into different categories. And for processing residues, the first step is to demonstrate that feedstock really, for primary feedstock, the supply-based evaluation is always required. So this is the biggest change or difference with the current standard, where we have lots of different regions where they used to source FSC material and it had green lane into the SBP certification. So in the new system, the supply-based evaluation for primary feedstock will always be required. However, sourcing primary feedstock with the claim of SBP benchmark scheme, I will mention about benchmarking again in a few slides. For example, FSC, that may help to manage the risk. Another important aspect is that there are two types of risk assessment. As you know, there is official SBP endorsed regional risk assessment, RRA, and a company-owned risk assessment. Then for processing residues, the first step is to demonstrate that the feedstock really belongs to the processing residues category, so that there is no fraud, that the supplier is not taking primary feedstock, making wood chips, sell it to the pellet mill, and then claiming that this is coming from the sawmill, for example. So there are certain ways how to demonstrate it. You should revisit Annex 1 of Standard 2 for more guidance, what kind of evidence needs to be collected and provided. But in simple terms, you need to justify that and demonstrate that processing residues are indeed processing residues. So once this is justified and demonstrated, then it depends on whether the feedstock is certified against one of the SBP recognized schemes like FSC or PFC or not. And if it is certified, then feedstock is accepted as SBP compliant. If not, then it is required to implement supply-based evaluation in the same way as for primary feedstock. So what we are seeing here, that if you continue sourcing FSC or PFC processing residues feedstock, then actually there is not many changes in the new standards. So you will be able to continue sourcing this feedstock, no need for supply-based evaluation, and you can just convert it to the SBP compliant biomass. However, there is this one additional step that you need to, potentially you may need to collect additional evidence to demonstrate that this feedstock really belongs to processing residues category. And the third one is post-consumer feedstock. So in this case, the biomass producer shall follow the requirements from Annex 1 and demonstrate that feedstock belongs to post-consumer category. If this is the case, the feedstock may be considered SBP compliant. Again, there are different steps how you can do it. Sometimes you can visually recognize it. Sometimes you need to collect more information. And sometimes you need to go to the supplier of this feedstock to the kind of further up to the supply chain and to the place where you can actually demonstrate the category, like so-called feedstock reclamation point. And finally, SBP recognizes FSC and PFC controlled system claims and allows to use such feedstock for SBP controlled biomass. The supply-based evaluation is not required in this case, and it is not even possible. So important to note here that biomass producer may decide to still apply the supply-based evaluation and can upgrade material from control to compliant status, but then of course they need to comply with all the requirements of the Standard 1. Another alternative could be that the producer is sourcing FSC or PFC certified feedstock, but let's say primary feedstock, and they cannot implement supply-based evaluation. It's too hard, it's too complicated. Those remaining uncovered indicators cannot be managed. Then they can downgrade FSC or PFC certified feedstock to first FSC or PFC controlled, and that can be then changed into the SBP controlled biomass. So there are different options, and in summary regarding control wood, we still keep claim SBP controlled, but this claim purely relies on these other two systems like FSC and PFC. So SBP doesn't have our own controlled system. We do not, let's say, define indicators in standard 1, which would be the minimum for controlled status. We say that only FSC or PFC controlled material can be used for SBP controlled biomass. So to recap, the biggest change is that there is no green lane for FSC or PFC certified primary feedstock, and these claims only serve as a potential risk management measure. So let me give you some updates about the benchmarking, because just continuing from the previous slide, now you know that you always need to do supply-based evaluation. However, we all know that FSC and PFC, they are very helpful in sourcing policies, and they can address a lot of different risks and provide a lot of different assurances. So for that reason, we have initiated so-called benchmarking process. I explained this in details during the previous webinar about the methodology, how are we doing, how we are benchmarking. These benchmarking reports for FSC and PFC, as well as the methodology, they are currently on the technical committee table for the final technical review. Preliminary technical committee didn't have any comments regarding draft results of equivalence evaluation. So what I have shown you last time and what I'm showing here again is probably close to the final result. So as you can see, there is 7 gaps in FSC system and 9 gaps in PFC system. The gaps include topics like HCV, non-conversion, forest carbon, and some social requirements. These gaps can be total gaps or partial gaps, where FSC or PFC requirements cover SBP indicators partially. So this whole thing is very important element of the SBE system. Those biomass producers who were sourcing FSC or PFC primary feedstock before will not be able to use such feedstock as SBP compliant directly, but the amount of effort to manage the risks will still be significantly lower than if they would source uncertified feedstock. So what I'm trying to say is that, of course, those claims will be very useful, and the benchmarking reports will indicate where biomass producers will be able to directly, officially evaluate or kind of use those claims as risk management measures. And for the remaining indicators, of course, they need to be managed separately. Yeah, so regarding the timing of this, we are currently doing this technical review. We are doing everything we can to have those reports available by the effective date. So once these documents are available and finalized, then we will inform all stakeholders immediately. This will be published on our website, and you can start using it in redesigning your supply-based evaluation systems. Next, we move to the mass balance topic. On this slide, we see a simple illustration of the mass balance. I showed this illustration already last time, 3 weeks ago, so I will not start explaining this again. If you wish, you can, if you want to repeat it, you can go and check a recording on our YouTube channel about the details, how this system works. However, what I want to show you today is the new interpretation. We have just published a normative interpretation 2 days ago about the transition from credit-based system in version 1 of the standards to mass balance system in version 2. And this interpretation will be relevant for all certificate holders who use credit-based system today. Regarding this interpretation, if you haven't received it, then you should go to our website. There is a place where you can subscribe to our updates. You can subscribe to Bulletin. You can subscribe to other technical updates. So make sure you are registered, because every time we publish a new document, we have something important to say. We distribute our updates through this kind of system. Due to GDPR, we cannot send it just to random people. So we need you to give us a consent, basically, to register to receiving emails from us. Of course, I can imagine that your certification body can also update you on that and send those updates and documents, but it can be not always timely. So better if you subscribe to our updates directly. So before I start talking about the interpretation, let me give you some background. So SBP Standard 4 version 1, which is currently valid, relies on chain of custody method in SBP approved chain of custody systems like FSC and PFC. Both of these schemes use concept of so-called credit-based system, which follows the basic unit in, unit out principle, but has an important difference to the mass balance method required in SBP Standard 4 version 2. Under FSC and PFC credit-based system, sustainability information or credits, they enter the credit account until the operator decides to sell physical material with some of those credits, until it decides to spend credits. If a customer doesn't require sustainability information, physical material can be sold and the credits can stay in the credit account in a virtual spreadsheet record, for example, for up to 24 months. So we all know that FSC and PFC chain of custody standards, they have these credit-based systems, and the maximum period for keeping those credits is 24 months. Operators are never allowed to have a deficit in sustainability credits on their credit account. But the amount of credits in the operator's credit account doesn't have to match the physical quantity of material on site. So the use of this system has the potential to create a situation where biomass producers may accumulate virtual stock of sustainability credits significantly exceeding the physical stock. So this is what is happening today in FSC and PFC. This is perfectly fine because this is allowed by those other systems, those schemes. But it indeed can be the case that a lot of virtual credits have been accumulated over the years. There are many customers who do not request certified material. Let's say many suppliers are certified, so companies have the ability to accumulate a lot of those virtual credits. So the key difference is that SBP Standard 4 version 2 requires that to carry sustainability information over to the next mass balance period, biomass producer must have at least the same quantity of physical stock. So almost unlimited virtual accumulation of credit is not allowed. I'm saying almost unlimited because in FSC and PFC systems, there is also this limitation of 24 months, and there is not that just that there is like a specific indicator in the standard talking about how much you can actually accumulate. However, obviously you can accumulate much more than you have physically in your stock. The balance in a mass balance system needs to be achieved over either 3 or 12 months period, depending on type of feedstock used. You may be asking why it's 3 or 12 months and not just 12 months as written in Standard 4 version 2. This is because SBP requires SBP compliant and SBP controlled biomass also to conform to SBP RED 2 compliant biomass requirements. In other words, when you use standards version 2, you also need to follow RED 2 bridging instruction document and need to follow RED 2 mass balance rules. And RED 2 mass balance rules have different periods, 3 and 12 months for different types of feedstocks. So while biomass producers will be allowed to have negative balance during the mass balance period, so for some time you can go negative. Under SBP Standard 4 version 2, SBP biomass producers will no longer be able to carry forward more balance than they have physical stock. So let's say it's very kind of restrictive requirement, because if you have received certain amount of feedstock, you produce some pellets, these pellets were certified, you then sell it out physically without the claim, so to say, and imagine that there is something left in the stock, a little bit. Then to move it to the next mass balance period, you can only move what you have physically in the stock. So you cannot move virtual credits. Like this kind of sustainability attributes, they need to be connected to the physical mixture. So like the mass balance system, although it has some benefits of going negative, for example, for some time, in the end, it's almost like a more physical and less virtual system. Because when you're receiving material from a certain mass balance account, you're kind of certain that it's coming from a certain mixture. So physically, of course, when you're taking material from this mixture, you don't know exactly what it was, but at least you know it belongs to a certain fixed mix, which was limited by the 3 or 12 months mass balance period. So now let's check the interpretation. Interpretation says that the biomass producer shall document the plan for the transition from the credit-based system to the mass balance system, including the start date of the mass balance period. The biomass producer may use available credits in its mass balance system up to the amount equivalent to the physical stock on the day preceding the first day of the established mass balance period. Note that to make SBP certified claims on any physical stock after the transition date, so on the stock which you had in inventory before, like during the time of credit system, this material shall be divided between product groups, and it may be carried forward into the mass balance account, of course not exceeding the physical stock, and it needs to comply with SBP requirements and bridging instruction document requirements. So what we are trying to achieve here is that in order to be not to risk violating EU requirements, right, to requirements, we had this dilemma that we want to allow biomass producers to use certain credits in their system, in the new system, but at the same time, we cannot allow credits which are not recognized by the RED 2, by our RED 2 EU recognition. So we basically have the rule, we kind of worked under the limitations of RED 2, and we established the restriction that material from the old credit system can indeed be moved into the mass balance, but it needs to be compliant. You need to demonstrate that this material during this period in the past, and this period is up to 3 months, I will mention this in a moment, this material needs to be compliant with RED 2. That comes all to the comment I made about planning the transition date. So planning the transition date is not just picking the date, it's actually starting well in advance, perhaps already now, maybe already yesterday, definitely tomorrow, to start planning, thinking that your feedstock should comply with RED 2 requirements. If you haven't started adding RED 2 to your certification scope, then you should probably start considering that. And of course, depending when your transition will happen, if it happens, if you're planning to do it next year, if you are not in a rush to do it in autumn, you already had your 2023 audit, then next audit will probably be in the beginning or spring next year. Then of course you can decide to transition then, and you don't need to worry too much at the moment. You can still prepare. You can also, until you transition, you can use your credit-based system. So that's kind of very important. Like we don't need to do anything now. Like from the time when you decide to transition, of course, you need to start using mass balance. But if your transition will happen in January, then until the end of the year, you can happily continue using the credit system. Then there is one note that according to the latest RED 2 clarification, if a biomass producer uses both forest feedstock and processing residues feedstock, it needs to use a 3-month period for all mass balance calculations. So only biomass producers using exclusively forest feedstock may use a 12-month period. So this is like one of the, and only primary feedstock will exclusively be used by wood chipping companies, but otherwise most of the pellet producers most likely will be using primary and processing residues feedstock. There will be, of course, some pellet mills who use exclusively processing residues feedstock, and then they have, of course, this 3 months limitation. But to my knowledge, there is probably no, if any, pellet mills who would use only primary feedstock. I may be wrong, but like, you know, it's not, definitely it's not common. So considering all that, we have a general rule that for most producers, the eligible, so to say, eligible credits will be only 3 months old. And eligible credits, these are the credits which you can take from the credit-based system and put into your mass balance system, and of course, considering the physical stock. So to try to make all this difficult explanation a little bit clearer, I try to create a simple example. So on this slide, you can see a biomass producer planning their transition. So they planned their transition to be September 1st. Then the biomass producer began procuring feedstock in compliance with SBP standards and RED II bridging instruction document on 1st of June. So this is like what I was saying, the timely planning of the transition. It's not just planning the date, it's not just planning the amount, but it's also planning that credit which you are trying to use in the mass balance system will need to be compliant with RED II requirements. And this is, again, this is not us being strict or mean, but it rather analyzing the consequences of our RED II recognition, the decision that RED II is mandatory with the new standards, and the desire not to violate RED II requirements. So in order to put something in the system, it needs to be RED II compliant. If we wouldn't have our RED II recognition and wouldn't work with RED II at all, then of course we could have slightly more flexible requirements, and moving credits from old SBP standard to the new SBP standard could have been a little bit easier, but because of RED II requirements, we need to be a little bit more restrictive. So on August 31st, the biomass producer had a total credit in their legacy credit system of 3,000 credits. So these credits can be very old. They could have been accumulated over a long period of time. So that's just like one of the data points which you can consider. Of these 3,000 credits, 2,000 credits were procured between 1st of June and 31st of August during this period. So we call this period of eligible credits, or let's say, I start calling it like this. It's not in the standard, but just for the sake of explanation. So this is like the eligible period where you can consider your credits. Then out of these 2,000 credits, 1,000 credits were from forest feedstock and 1,000 credits were for processing residues feedstock. So remember, I explained during the last webinar that in the new system, we are moving towards the new approach of product groups, and the mass balances will be handled per product group. That's why in order to put some old credits into the mass balance system, so mass balance system works with product groups, you also need to split credits into the product groups. Although, of course, before 1st of September, organization was on the credit system and there was no need to have those product groups. But specifically for the sake of transition, for this exercise, for this kind of process, these credits, eligible credits, 2,000, need to be split and need to be defined to which type of feedstock they belong to, which product group. Then another one important information here is that on August 31st, the biomass producer had 1,000 tons of physical stock inventory. So they are producing pellets and they have 1,000 tons in physical stock. So in total, we have 3 data points here. Total remaining credits. This is just for information. It's probably just to realize how much virtual credits the biomass producer has and how much it may potentially lose, or how much, like if you start planning transition today, that could give you some idea that what credits you should start spending today in order not to lose everything. Then the next data point is so-called eligible credits of 2,000 tons divided into the forest, feedstock, and processing residues product groups. So these are eligible credits. But since we have this third data point restriction of physical stock inventory, 1,000 tons here, then of course not all eligible credits can be moved into the mass balance. So therefore, based on all these different restrictions, the biomass producer may either choose to carry over all 1,000 tons of forest feedstock, all 1,000 tons of processing residues feedstock, or some kind of combination of the two. So, and the rule is that the credits which you are moving into mass balance needs to be eligible and may not exceed the physical stock of 1,000 tons. So you can imagine there is like unlimited number of combinations. And in this example, we see that the mass balance is starting on 1st of September. And this particular organization decided to move 500 tons of credit of forest feedstock and 500 tons of credit of processing residues. Then you can see the plus sign here, which means that once they started the mass balance, then they will be adding, registering input going forward. And this new input, of course, can be considered per product group in their mass balance calculations. In reality, we suspect that biomass producers will probably, if they have a choice and they have a lot of credits accumulated, they split them into the product groups. They will probably prioritize transferring processing residues credits into the mass balance system because those credits are more acceptable by the market, or let's say there is certain limitations in the Dutch market which place quite many additional restrictions on primary feedstock. So we recommend you to also, of course, go and find this interpretation, read the interpretation. Nicholas, maybe you can find the link from our website, link to the normative interpretations for standards version 2, and paste the link. So what we have created a new document for normative interpretations. It currently, I think, includes 2 or 3 interpretations. So you'll find this text there. And yeah, if you have any questions remaining on how to actually do this transition, and we fully acknowledge that we are doing here rather theoretical exercise, playing with some numbers, the real life may have other aspects, and we may have some situations where basically you may need to come to us and seek some additional guidance. And we are happy to discuss your specific examples, specific credit accounts, specific challenges, and we won't be able to make this requirement softer due to reasons I just explained because of RED 2. However, we may need to think about potential additional guidance or any kind of support that is maybe necessary. All right, so let's move to slightly easier topics, which is questionable, of course, depends. Some people find SAR report also quite complicated. But here I would like to mention things related to Standard 5. Standard 5 is published. It's very short standard, not much information there. And you know that most of the bulk of technical information is included in ID5E document. ID5E document is finalized. It's currently being edited and designed and will be published shortly. I have already presented changes related to ID5E document in the previous webinar as well, online in the full training recordings, so you can check it there. Those of you who wants to see the details, of course, can or should go and once we publish ID5E, read it as well. But today I would like to mention a few things related to the SAR report. So the SAR report format remains more or less the same. Some new fields were added, like product group ID. We renamed SDIs to downstream transport route. we have a new field called physical feedstock inventory variation, and the section about DBSD has been removed because we are now we have implemented a concept of product group IDs, which makes all transactions, all mass balances rather more kind of dynamic in terms of product group and in terms of sustainability information. From the beginning of this year, SAR report was moved from Word template into the DTS, and the DTS will be updated with the new SAR format by the effective date, the latest, potentially a little bit earlier. And then for today's session, I would like to have one specific guidance when working with the SAR report. So we are, of course, considering thinking about a kind of a special separate training on ID5E and SAR report documents. But one topic which I would like to cover today, because it creates some potential issues sometimes, and we have few cases where SAR report had to be corrected. So the key issue is the reconciliation of feedstock data, the tonnage of feedstock and produced biomass data, tonnage of pellets, considering the conversion factor and moisture content. We have seen at least some cases when amount of produced biomass exceed the amount of incoming feedstock, considering the moisture content and possible losses. And after our investigation, analysis, talking to different stakeholders, producers and end users, we came up with the two common reasons for the deviation. So one reason could be that the physical feedstock inventory prior to the beginning of the reporting period is not considered. So table 2.1 includes feedstock received during the reporting period, and physical inventory prior to the reporting period may be left out. So that could be one reason. Second is the overestimation of the feedstock moisture content. So we had several cases where wood chips were recorded with the moisture content of, let's say, 40%, which was higher than the common moisture of 20 to 30%. And don't take these numbers as fact. There are very different situations. But what I'm trying to say here is that even the small error of 5 to 10% can cause a major deviation when you do the reconciliation. So if your actual moisture was 30%, but you put 40, then when you start doing the reconciliation and you start removing water, removing moisture from the feedstock tonnages, then you suddenly have a situation where you don't have enough feedstock for what you have stated, what has been produced. So the biomass producer, when completing the SAR report, shall do the basic reconciliation calculation with these two tables, and in case of deviation, shall either correct the data or provide additional explanation. So if you see the deviation, then first we have a new field here, which is called net physical feedstock inventory for the reporting period. So you can provide some tonnages which were in stock prior to the reporting period to basically cover this deviation. And then later in the report, you need to provide justification and explanation and show the evidence of that to the auditors. And another, if you have a kind of potentially problem with moisture content, then you need to kind of review your calculations, review your methodology, how you measure moisture content. And it could be that could be a very common reason for, so to say, missing feedstock, that you have overestimated the moisture content. In any case, of course, those numbers cannot be just engineered just to make it reconcile. But of course, if you are correct in your moisture content, you need to provide a justification to certification body to explain. So you cannot just change from 40 to 30 just to meet the calculation to match the numbers, but you rather need to then to explain why you have overestimated the moisture before. And the last topic for my update is some other updates, some other relevant developments. So the first topic would be that we have spotted some minor errors in various documents, and we will be publishing the so-called erratum before the standards effective date. That will be done through the normative interpretation. Some examples include corrections to be made in glossary, where we use some old terms, maybe inaccurate terms, have some inaccurate references in some documents. So as it always happens with these kind of sophisticated documents, although many people have reviewed them, there are some minor things which we would like to fix. We will not be reopening documents themselves. We will not be editing standards. They will remain the same, but we'll do it through the erratum. And this time from 10th of May, when we published the standards, to 10th of August, it's actually not just to do the trainings and update our systems, but actually to take another 100th look at the documents, start designing all the systems, and then that helps us to spot some remaining minor errors which we are going to fix. So once this erratum normative interpretation is ready, of course, we'll publish it and inform all stakeholders. Then second, I would like to mention is that we are constantly updating our website with new documents, some guidance and summaries documents. We have created a section for SBP documents under version 2. So previously, if you go to our website to normative documents, there was everything related to SBP standards, then instruction documents, and so on. Now, as we'll have situation that during the transition period, there will be 2 versions used in parallel, version 1 and version 2. So we have 2 separate sections, and we have started adding instruction documents under standards version 2 and also normative interpretations. So when we have eventually regional risk assessments updated, they will also go under version 2, and benchmarking reports will also go under version 2 because they are not relevant for version 1. The next one I would like to mention is that we have updated our YouTube channel, and now all webinar and training recordings are available in public access. Previously, we were sharing a direct link for accessing those videos, and if you would be going to the channel directly, you wouldn't find all the recordings. For some reason, we wanted to keep it slightly private. However, as there are this process is sophisticated, we want to support as much as possible all stakeholders. Then we have changed the settings, and all the recordings, including all the previous webinars, RED 2 webinars, launch webinar, previous webinars 3 weeks ago. This webinar is going to be published. Then the full training where we recorded full sessions on 6 standards and general information about SBP. So there is 7 long recordings. These are also available. So we are asking you to go visit our YouTube channel and subscribe to channel, so that as you are probably using YouTube daily anyway, you'll get a notification once we publish the recording. So this webinar will be published as well, and you can get quickly the immediate notification once we do it. And if you need to share it with your colleagues or partners or whoever, or watch some parts again, then you will be immediately notified. And the last thing for my presentation, I would like to inform you that we are organizing several in-person training workshops in different regions. These include Vietnam, US, Canada, Portugal, Latvia, and Denmark. So these events are free, and we are going to focus on local applicability of the new standards. Please definitely use the opportunity and register for these workshops today. Also, please help us to quicker understand the number of potential participants, so that we can plan our venue better, and we can plan catering and perhaps even agenda for the meeting. Please also, so if you are planning to participate, don't just put into your own calendar, but actually register for the workshop, so that we have the visibility, and please distribute it for your networks, because this is very significant investment for us to go and visit those places. It will be 2 secretariat members at each of the workshops. It will be 1.5 days events where you will spend with SBP team, and yeah, I hope it will be very helpful technical support to our stakeholders. So don't miss this opportunity. And that is all what I had for today. Now we can move to answering your questions. Before that, as I promised, let's have a 10-minute break just to grab a glass of coffee or water, and let's be back in 10 minutes, or 8 minutes, 10 past. And that time will also allow us to quickly go through your questions, which you have already submitted, and start preparing our answers.
Thank you, Roman. And for that, I so invite everyone to post your question you might have after listening to the presentation, but as well on any other topics as you have started working through the version 2 standards. You might have questions that have popped up in your mind and you want to ask us. You can use the Q&A function, which is on top of your window, MS Team Windows. You can post it there and we'll answer as they go and as they arrive. So we'll see you back in 7 minutes. Thank you very much.
right, we are back. Very good. Everyone full of coffee. Ready for questions. So let us first start from making a few comments on a question regarding supply-based evaluation in Vietnam. I see that Laszlo has already replied in the chat. The question was whether it's possible to add the supply standard one, basically the supply-based evaluation for primary material in Vietnam. At the moment, most likely organizations are using FSC system, either FSC control wood or buying certified round wood. And we got like some indications from the market that people were under impression that somehow it is not possible to do supply-based evaluation if there is no official regional risk assessment. And this is not true. The correct answer, as Laszlo already said, is that in each country, the supply-based evaluation is allowed, even in absence of the official regional risk assessment. The organization may develop their own supply-based evaluation, their own risk assessment against standard one. There are requirements regarding competence, qualifications of the team who will be doing that, which is understandable. You need to know quite a lot regarding forestry, legislation, environment. This work can also be outsourced to external contractors, which is very common in Europe and in some other regions. We hear quite a lot that external consultants, they are not many on the market, but they are heavily involved in helping companies to prepare their supply-based evaluations. So yeah, we are very much looking forward to companies in Vietnam starting doing the SBE. And what we are doing from our side, we are trying to initiate development of the official risk assessment, the RRA for Vietnam, to help companies to avoid the need to do their own risk assessment. So we are expecting that that SBP certification will definitely take off in Vietnam in coming years. So we will be trying to provide the regional risk assessment. But what will remain to be done for the companies is to manage the remaining specified risks. Some of those can be managed by buying from the benchmark schemes like FSC and PFC. But as I already explained, not all indicators are covered, and for some indicators at least. And it is not always possible to source certified feedstock. So for the specified indicators, you will need to mitigate them. The local workshops will also serve, especially in those countries where we do not have a regional risk assessment. It will probably or may serve, we don't have a final agenda yet, to try to map potential specified risk indicators. So I think it could be a good idea to have a session to exchange views to start prepare for the work to initiate the regional risk assessment. We have few major regions. Vietnam would be one, Brazil would be another, United States, which a lot of biomass is coming from, is also currently not covered by the regional risk assessment. So it would be interesting to actually start thinking like which indicators of revised standard one will have specified risk.
And maybe I can use that opportunity to first highlight the to gain access or knowledge around the standards as companies are looking either to develop their SBEs or to implement the revised standards in the YouTube channel, as you mentioned. But as well, SBP for the first time has published a series of guidance documents that help producers to and anyone, any stakeholders interested in SBP to have access to more contextualized information around the standards. So there is guidance for standard 1, guidance for standard 2, and guidance for standard 4. I've put the link in the chat. So I really recommend everyone to use that as well as a key source of information as you are preparing or updating your SBEs.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think we can, we see there is one hand raised. So there's not many questions coming from the Q&A section. So we would open the mic and really you can if you want to verbally ask your question, please raise your hand. So we will now unmute. Let's see.
So the person, Tulip, yes, Tulip, please.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. Yeah, thank you very much for your very informative presentation and very well explanation of all the questions that we provide. So I have one question relating to the SBP Standards 1. So we are going to obtain the certification covering the Standards 1, and currently we are having like about 500 potential suppliers, I mean forest owner. So I wonder, because the demand for the next year is, I think it should be more than that. So I wonder if at the time of the preparation for the audit, we only can provide about 500, let's say, and then during before the next audit, can we increase more than 500 by informing like a control, or it need to be certified before we purchase? Given that we already do the supply-based evaluation, supply-based report, and get approved from the CB. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a very good question, and let me explain. I think, yeah, it's very important to understand this concept. So SBP system works through the risk-based approach, same approach as FSC controlled wood or EUTR or PFC control sources. So it's a due diligence system. In this process, the organization who is buying feedstock needs to assess the risk and then design, like for the whole, not for the specific supplier, but for the region, for the sourcing area. And then for any specified risks, for example, health and safety indicator or soil quality indicator, or maybe indicators related to high conservation values, they need to design risk management measures. And then they need to start, when they source feedstock, they need to implement those measures. And risk-based approach doesn't require biomass producer to fix the number of suppliers. So that is not relevant. Of course, you need to have a full control of your suppliers in the sense that you understand how many suppliers you have. Every time you source from a new supplier, you need to ensure that in this particular case, the risk is understandable and it is being mitigated, which doesn't, again, mean that you need to audit each of the suppliers. There are certain flexibility how you should design your risk mitigation, and it's a whole different topic because we don't know the context yet, we don't know the specific risks, but your supplier base and your list of suppliers will be really dynamic, and you don't need to inform the certification body or the scheme that you are getting 500, 1, 2, 3, 600. There is like some suppliers are dropping. You don't really need it. It's really the certification body is evaluating your system. And one of the criteria, of course, which they will evaluate is your capacity to run the system. So if the auditor comes and it sees that there is a half-time employee managing a supply-based evaluation with many risks and hundreds of suppliers, the auditor may say that it's not sufficient technical resource, and you may need to have, like, how do you manage all those risks? But other than that, the number of suppliers is not fixed. So maybe you are confusing it a little bit with the forest management certification. Like in FSC and PFC, there is a certification on the land basis, so-called group certifications. And in group certifications, indeed, the members of the group need to be fixed and they need to be documented, and they need to be, I think, on even FSC website. So, you know, because they can sell separately to someone else. But in the risk-based approach in SBE, it's not a problem at all. And you can start with 5, you can start with 10. Ideally, you should start with some suppliers, because what CBs don't like is if they come to the company and company doesn't have any suppliers yet. So all what they are showing is theoretical. In this case, the CB may require a follow-up audit when you start actually implementing risk management measures, because it would be very hard to just look at the papers. They want to see the actual implementation. So you would need to have at least some suppliers. And frankly, the question will be not to fix the number of suppliers, but to really assess your capacity. That's very important. It's also part of the general, resource management, that if you will tell them that now we have one person, now we have 5 suppliers, but next year we will have like 10,000 suppliers, auditor will be quite cautious and concerned, and will probably ask quite additional questions. And that's not necessarily a problem still, because you may say that now we are starting, we are going to hire. It's up to you to train new people, to increase the technical resource. And the next audit, when the auditor comes, they will check, okay, today you have 700 suppliers. This is your team. This is your qualifications. This is your risk mitigation measures, records, field visits, and they will verify and confirm it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. And of course, we invite you to join us in our training in Ho Chi Minh as well, where we'll be able to have those conversations as well. It might be a good opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, even like sometimes in this kind of workshop, we take a whiteboard and we start drawing things, and we start, here is the biomass producer, there are suppliers, there are the supply chain of this kind of complexity, trying to answer the questions. So, yeah.
So maybe as we're waiting for if other participants have questions, is to maybe Tulip mentioned the question of control woods. So what is the revised standard position or requirement with regard to control wood and compliant wood?
Sorry. You want to? Are you asking me the question?
Yeah.
Or Laszlo?
One of you. I'm just asking the questions.
Laszlo, you're muted.
Why don't you take a break, Roman? We are maintaining the possibility of making a controlled claim in the revised standards. It's a relatively small volume at the moment in the overall transactions. And in terms of the definition, so we do not have our own definition of what would constitute a controlled input in relationship to our indicators. We have defined it as a feedstock that is certified under FSC control wood system, or PFC controlled sources, or SFI fiber sourcing. So basically, if you are looking at producing biomass with a controlled claim, then as an eligible input, you can use feedstocks which are certified under the schemes that I just mentioned. There's also obviously the possibility to downgrade compliant to controlled, but the general rule is that FSC control wood, PFC control sources, SFI fiber sourcing as an eligible input, and that would result in SBP controlled claim biomass.
Thank you, Laszlo. And with regard to the EU RED certifications, what can we re-specify the requirements of EU RED compliance and version 2, and how does it work with SBP compliant or SBP control material?
It's worth repeating again. So we have now published 2 days ago a normative interpretation which says the following: that every time under the new standards version 2, when company wants to make SBP compliant or SBP controlled claim, these claims need to be also RED 2 compliant. So this is kind of a formal requirement, like a practical implementation for transactions. It's not sufficient to be certified against bridging ID document, because there was some kind of confusion. Companies were thinking, oh, maybe I will be certified against standards version 2. I will be certified against bridge and ID document. But when I do the sales, I can still make separate different claims. Some were even thinking that there is an SBP RED 2 compliant claim, a separate available. And this is not the case. So we have connected it all together so that every time SBP claim is made, it also need to be RED 2 compliant. However, there is a choice, or there is two ways to connect RED 2 claim. It can be connected to SBP compliant or SBP controlled claim. And we already see some markets where, let's say, there is a possibility to produce SBP controlled claim because companies are sourcing, let's say, FSC controlled feedstock. And for them to add RED 2 compliance is rather easy compared to complying with the whole standard 1, revised standard 1. So there will be, I think in Asia, we are going to see quite a lot, a combination of SBP controlled plus RED 2 compliant. And as I said, it's also, as Laszlo just explained, like, you can downgrade. So you may be buying FSC certified material. You don't want to, since there are certain gaps, you don't want to upgrade it to the SBP compliant because, I don't know, forest carbon, some other FPX, whatever, like reasons. So you downgrade it to controlled, you produce SBP controlled, but then RED 2 doesn't feel too difficult for you. Like LULUCF Route A evidence is available, and sustainable harvest, you check the requirements, they're quite reasonable, and you can demonstrate the compliance. So that combination is totally possible, controlled and RED 2 compliant. And again, repeating this again, you cannot make a separate RED 2 compliant claim. You cannot just, pick region document, comply with those requirements, and sell separate RED 2 claim. And this is different from some other schemes because there are some other voluntary schemes who have their own claim, and then they have special EU kind of claim, which they can be made separately. In SBP system, this is not allowed. It needs to be, and one of the reasons is to ensure the high level credibility of all our claims, and secondly, to ensure the fungibility. I think there was a lot of discussions that sometimes customers are changing. So the supplier, the material was intended to be sent to one end user, then it's changing to some other regions, and it needs to be fungible. It needs to comply with the set of requirements which are suitable for everyone.
Thank you very much. Everything seems very clear in either our guidance document or YouTube channels or the standards. There is no additional question. I've got one though, because it's some question that have come to us, and something that is very important is the transition period and what needs to happen before the end of the transition period. I think it's worth repeating or re-explaining it clearly.
Yeah, so the transition period is 15 months. It starts from the effective date, which is going to be 10th of August. So the transition will end on 9th of November 2024. And what needs to happen before this date? It's not just the audit needs to be implemented, carried out, but actually certificates of all the SBP certified companies need to be formally updated to include version 2 of the standards. And you can imagine that this includes not just carrying out the on-site audit, but also completing the report, quality review of the report, sending information to SBP, the secretariat, perhaps closing major non-conformances. We discussed it yesterday that we are still discussing ourselves in the team whether major non-conformances will need to be closed before transition can be considered completed or not. I think there is a pretty clear understanding that minor non-conformances can remain as in normal certification till the next audit, but we are still thinking about major non-conformances. We have received feedback from yesterday from participants that they prefer to allow transition to be considered completed, even if there are some major non-conformances open, because major non-conformances will still result, if not addressed, will result in suspension in 3 months. So to make it a little bit more user-friendly, you may say. And one thing which I would like to also mention is that when it comes to RED 2 requirements, in RED 2, we have different rules for non-conformances, and there are additional type of non-conformance, which is critical non-conformance, which is usually related to fraud, and which leads, if discovered, leads to immediate termination of certificate. The major non-conformance under RED 2 leads to immediate suspension, which is much stricter than under SBP standard. And like, even though organization needs to comply with bridging ID requirements, we say that the stricter non-conformance rules apply only to RED 2 indicators. So if RED 2 indicator, sustainability indicator, or mass balance rules are violated, then stricter approach will need to be taken. If requirement which is exclusively only included in SBP standard, then SBP non-conformance rules can be implemented, and major non-conformance may end up in 3 months. So that's very important consideration. It's out of our control. So the transition, maybe a few more comments on that. Let's say, considering that our interpretation of full transition is to complete the audit, complete the report, update the certificate. That means that audit should not probably be planned for 8th of November next year. It should probably be planned at least a month before, which will still put some pressure on CBs, because the average time from the audit date to the completion of the whole audit, depending on the scope, can easily be 2 or 3 months, especially for a more complicated supply-based evaluation situations. So then it means that, you know, if your audit this year will happen in September, and you will not be yet ready to be audited against the new standard, then next year your audit should definitely happen in September, or maybe it should be moved to a little bit earlier. And those guys who have audit in October and November this year, if they are not ready, I mean, again, then they need to move to earlier next year, and you need to speak to your certification body. So like one recommendation we give is, please contact your certification body today. Friday is a great day to call and put some pressure and ask them, like, when do they think they will be prepared to offer the certification. Those of you who have your audit in next year, January, February, March, you shouldn't be relaxed, but you can probably have some time, and you will have, like, you know, several months, half a year to prepare. But especially those around November, October, and so on, like, and even those of you who already had your audit. So talk to your CBs, like, do they have capacity? Put some signal, because if everyone will talk to their CBs and indicate that you will need to have your audit at certain time, then CB will probably start thinking about training additional auditors, getting some support from us, working with accreditation body. So yeah, let's put some gentle pressure, everyone.
Yeah, I think, the main message is get in touch with your certification body so you can plan ahead with them to prepare your transition and to have transitioned on time before the end of the transition period. And I would ask potentially Laszlo to give us an update on the regional risk assessment, which are a key component of the SBP system. So we mentioned Vietnam, but we have more than to say about the RRs.
Okay, thank you. So I will speak briefly about the existing ones and then the ones that are in the pipeline. So as you probably know, we have 6 regional risk assessments at the moment, 4 in Europe and 2 in Canada. The 4 European ones, Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are with the technical committee at the moment. So we have started work on the revision of these at the beginning of the year. And we expect a second round of public consultation to be conducted for these in August, September. So we are looking at having revised regional risk assessments for Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania ready around October, November. For British Columbia and Canada, which is the other 2 existing regional risk assessments, We are working at the moment with our stakeholders to agree on the timeline to revise these regional risk assessments, so we do not have a concrete timeline at the moment. So these are the ones that the currently existing endorsed regional risk assessments. In terms of what's in the pipeline, so we have a regional risk assessment for Portugal, which hopefully will start the first public consultation in the next couple of weeks. Then we are aware of 4 other regional risk assessments in preparation for various Canadian provinces. I do not have a concrete timeline at the moment on when these are going to be finalized. And the other 2 that we are in initial steps in starting the RIA development process is Vietnam. We think that it would be a good way of supporting the scale up of SBP certification in Vietnam to have a regional risk assessment that all existing and potential biomass producers can use. And then we are also in discussions with various stakeholders on a regional risk assessment for Southeast US, which obviously it's a very important biomass producer region for SBP. So I think, again, it would be a great step to have a regional risk assessment for this region. So obviously, I guess for those of you who operate in a country where there is a regional risk assessment, you will, unfortunately or fortunately, you have to wait until the revised regional risk assessments are ready to be able to transition. So that's why we are trying to prioritize these regional risk assessments. If you operate in a country where there is a regional risk assessment in the pipeline, then I would suggest to keep in touch with us. So, we are obviously trying to keep stakeholders informed and up to date about where we are with these regional risk assessments, because obviously that will determine how your preparations are going to take place. Are you going to update your supply-based evaluations or wait for the regional risk assessment? So yeah, do please keep in touch. We are obviously going to do our best to keep you also informed to make sure that we don't duplicate the efforts.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. Very clear. And I've got another question for Roman with regard to some regulatory compliance and regulatory approval of the SBP scheme.
Yes, so we are currently working with regulators in Netherlands and the UK. We are already in the process of going through the review of our updated documents. When it comes to Netherlands, then the process will be relatively straightforward because, as you may know, our standard 1 itself is not recognized there, and we work through the special ID documents, ID 2D and 2E, the group scheme and risk-based approach. So those documents won't change. They will remain the same. We are now in the process of explaining this to RVO. We just had a call yesterday, and it seems that this process will be rather formality with them to basically reconnect those documents to the new standards without much changes or much issues. With the UK regulator, we are also in touch. We also don't expect any problems because we are recognized by them against their sustainability requirements and legality requirements. We believe that our standards have improved. They were not, the threshold or benchmark has not been lowered, but rather increased, and standards became more clear and in some parts more detailed and strict. So this process will probably take some time, potentially from a few weeks to a few months. But yeah, our objective, of course, is get those things in place by the effective date. And you, as a certificate holders, should probably not worry too much. This work is done by Secretariat in the background. As I said, we are in contact with regulators. Their review usually takes time, but this should not have any negative impact on the markets.
Right. Thank you very much, Roman, for that. We as well encourage you to, of course, register to our mailing list, but as well to our automated update to receive information when our documentation are updated or published, including the normative interpretation. We as well to keep an eye on the website, on the SBP website, in the section of normative documents, where we will be publishing in the coming weeks the finalized remaining documents that are in the final process of development, ready for the effective dates of the 10th of August. And Roman, what is happening with the DTS and the audit portal?
The update is ongoing. So we are, as already mentioned, the SAR template has been slightly amended. So this is being built into the DTS. Then obviously the templates for supply-based report and PCR reports, public summary reports, they are being updated as well. You all know that we are working with audit portal exclusively. Those reports are not completed in the Word template anymore, but only through the online platforms. However, due to the changes in the standards, we need to update those forms online. So our colleague data manager Lauri is working on this, and this should all be ready by the effective date.
Excellent. And I will put as well on the chat, so everybody has it, where to sign up for the update on SBP. I think it's always good to have those email handy. And as well, you will find on our website the detail of the in-person workshop, which will be the next phase of our onboarding of the certificate holders and all the stakeholders, including auditors, but as well civil society parties interested in SBP or supporting the implementation of SBP, to have a direct interaction with the Secretariat to hear about more detailed conversation on the revised standard, but as well exchange questions, suggestion, ideas of how the rollout of the standard works and will happen, and to create a sense of community, SBP community in countries. So that's really the next step in our resource commitment toward the successful rollout of the version 2 of the standard. And we really hope to see you participating and joining us. If you have questions, we are all available. Main email address is info@sbp-cert.org. But you can as well reach out to us directly by various means. And I'm looking if we had question coming up. Otherwise, I hope we have provided some meaningful information to all of you. We remain at your sides in this process, and don't hesitate to communicate with us any further question you might have or related to your individual cases that, of course, you want to share.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Laszlo. Thank you, all participants of today's webinar. The webinar has been recorded. It will be uploaded next week to YouTube. If you go and subscribe today, then you have immediate notification once it is uploaded there. But with that, we are closing our webinar for today. We wish everyone a great Friday, and I'm sure everyone is almost going to the holidays, or at least enjoying the summer days.
Thank you very much, everyone, and see you again soon.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening or a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.